Building your first web app is one of the most frustrating things as a beginner. I don't mean going to YouTube and taking a 10-hour tutorial on how to build a full stack app. I mean actually getting an original idea, or even if the idea is not original, getting an idea, creating a project from scratch and building that project up front end and back end, and then hosting it so you can share to your friends and family and ultimately put in your resume or put in your portfolio. I'm ATO, a full stack web and mobile application developer, and in this video I will guide you through exactly what you should do as a beginner in order to build your first web app and publish it by yourself. And I'm not going to give you generic advice you can find anywhere on the internet. I'll tell you exactly what I did as a beginner to build my first project and host it, and ultimately be proud of myself to a certain degree. So firstly, I made sure to get good at CSS. There's one big problem I'm seeing with beginners nowadays. They want to learn all these new technologies because every other YouTuber talks about learning React.js, learning Next.js, Tailwind CSS, all these fancy things, whereas as a web developer, the main thing you have to be good at is CSS, because everything about web development is the user interaction with your website. So if you do not know CSS, you can't actually style these elements that is going to be appealing to the user to stick to the website and keep on using your website. So learning CSS is absolutely fundamental before going into all these other technologies like React.js, Next.js and Tailwind CSS, and just to name a few. Before deciding to get into CSS, I was playing around with React.js, but I was never really able to build a full website. It's until I decided to get into CSS very seriously before I actually started to get a hang of all this web development stuff. And how did I do to learn and practice my CSS well? All I did was to clone websites that were already made. So I spent time cloning a lot of websites, ranging from YouTube to the Google search page to the Docker website to W3 School's website, just to name a few. And doing this, it helped me practice CSS a whole lot. It helped me basically figure out how to style websites very efficiently. And in the span of just like 2 weeks, I got really better at CSS. The second thing I did before embarking into the development of my own web app was to get familiar with Git. Yes, you've heard me right. Getting familiar with Git is something very essential that you should learn how to do even as a beginner. Don't push it forward to when you're already having experience. Start doing it as a beginner. All those projects I was developing as a beginner were saved to my GitHub repository. So when I start a new project to clone a new website, I make sure to create a Git repository and commit all my changes and all my progress to the Git repository. I wasn't really doing anything advanced with Git, but it just helped me to get familiar with Git. And later on, that was very beneficial to me, because when I hopped on the project with teams and with other people, I was really very familiar with the Git platform, and it just helped the team and the work go very smoothly. So the third step was to get familiar with a back-end framework. So I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I did a computer science degree, and the computer science degree requires you to learn a programming language. And the programming languages we learned were things like C, Java. I think we learned a little bit of Python, but it was mostly C and Java. But the thing they didn't teach us was that a part of the programming that we learned, there's another layer that allows you to build web apps that are going to run on the server and are going to communicate with your front end through APIs. And that was the next thing I learned. Since I already knew Java, the next thing I learned was a framework that helped me build web apps that will run on the servers. And that's when I came into a framework called Spring Boot. This was something very new to me at the time, because I didn't even know what Spring Boot was. I didn't even know how to build server-side applications. I only knew how to build applications that would run on the command line. And honestly speaking, applications that run on the command line is good when you're learning a programming language, but when you want to start building web apps and going into server-side development, you need to learn more than that. And frameworks make your life easier, but as a beginner coming just from the basic knowledge of programming, that is another layer of abstraction that you need to learn. So once you learn a programming language, move on to a framework. And as I said, I learned Java, so the framework I learned with Java was a Spring Boot framework. If you learn something like JavaScript, make sure to learn Express.js. If you learn Python, you can learn Django or Flask. So that was the third thing I did. I built like 3 casual projects using the framework, and then I was good to go because I already knew how to build server-side applications. In addition to this step, once you learn how to build server-side applications, you have to learn how to expose your APIs and ultimately test them. And that is when I came into contact with a tool called Postman. Learning all this made me realize that I didn't really learn a lot about building web applications in college or in the university. University mostly covers the basics of programming, and the rest you have to figure it out by yourself. If you're not able to land an internship which can teach you all of this easily, you have to do a lot of research, and unfortunately that's how the education system is. But luckily, people like us are doing these videos to guide you. So the next thing I did was to learn Postman, learn how to test my APIs, my endpoints, and after that, I think I was already ready to get started with my own project. So the first thing I did after learning a backend framework was obviously to learn a front-end framework, because honestly, nowadays, learning only HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is no longer enough. You need to set yourself to the standards of the industry and learn the technologies we use currently today. And what better option than to learn React.js? So the next thing I learned was React.js. React.js was a little bit daunting at first. At first, the concept of hooks, states, all these things, the DOM was a little bit confusing, but once you start getting a little bit familiar with React.js, you realize that it's actually really easy. It's actually really easier to code with React.js than to code with vanilla JavaScript. So I just continue cloning more and more websites, but this time replacing my stack of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript with React.js. And React.js, basically, when you code React.js, you're basically doing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, because React.js is JavaScript. So this was very beneficial for me to learn the core fundamentals of what I will be using up to today as a developer. And finally, after all these 4 steps, after learning CSS very well, after going through Git and being familiar with Git, after learning backend frameworks and Postman, and ultimately React.js, I was then finally ready to start my web app. So this is the most daunting part for a lot of people. After learning all these things, how do they do to get started? Because when you take a lot of tutorials, when you learn from other people, starting your own project is a huge shift in paradigm. You're shifting the context totally. So you have to think differently, you have to figure out stuff on your own, and this is very daunting for a lot of beginners. So the thing I did in order to get started with building my own web app was I looked for a problem around me that I really wanted to solve, because I understood that it was very important for me to hop on a project or a problem that I was quite passionate about, because it's very easy to start something and stop along the way. So I spotted the problem around me that I had. It was a very simple problem. It was just a simple web app that helped you calculate transactional fees for what we call mobile money. And that was a very simple idea, but it took me a lot of time, a lot of brain power, a lot of mental energy, because that was the first web app I was building. I had to figure out the design, I had to figure out how to make it work, I had to figure out a lot of things. That's when I realized that all the knowledge that I gathered throughout wasn't enough. It wasn't enough just to have that knowledge. That is the knowledge I learned from all those things beforehand. You also had to come with problem solving skills. And that was the most important thing that guided me throughout. Making research when I'm stuck, figuring out how to come up with custom algorithms in the backend in order to solve the problems I was trying to solve. And all those things resulted in several sleepless nights. I spent about 10 days straight, like sleeping just 5 hours every day, working from morning to night, coding from morning to night, just building that. It's true, today when I look back on it, I can probably build the whole app in 3 days or less, but I spent a whole lot of time building it. And ultimately, this became the most rewarding experience for me as a developer, because it was basically a breakthrough. All the experience I have today stems from the fact that that very day I took that decision to build my own web app and not look at tutorials endlessly. So if you're struggling with starting your first web app as a beginner, I hope this video was helpful. Just make sure to follow these steps step by step, and ultimately starting your own project and seeing it through to the end. Do not stop along the way. Keep on doing the project until you're able to finish it, host it, and share with your friends, and ultimately put in your portfolio. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, leave a like and subscribe, and let me know in the comment section if you want me to talk about anything else. I'm always happy to share my experience and be able to help people who are once where I was. So see you in the next one.